Hi, I'm Martin Kelley, and I'm with Friends Journal, and we do these author video chats. And I'm very happy today to be here with Thomas Gates. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And Thomas's recent article here is Beyond What Words Can Utter, Moving Past the Question of Belief. And uh, and this is in the December 2025 issue of Friends Journal. We gave ourselves a tough question. What do we believe? Most religious bodies could answer that pretty easily. Tell us some of the challenges friends might have on this.
Well, it seems like it's a question that comes up with some regularity. I and another woman in our meeting recently did a couple sessions for newcomers, and we have quite an influx of young adults, interestingly enough, who are coming with no particular knowledge. They just have heard it's kind of cool to sit in
Yeah,
silence.
it's great.
They want to know, what do Quakers believe? And it's a real challenge. As I said in the article, I'm not sure I can pick out any one thing that I believe that I share with every other Quaker in the world. There's such a diversity of beliefs. And so in the article, I talk about this uh, exercise that Philadelphia Yearly Meeting did. Gosh, it must be, 10 or 15 years ago. Arthur Larrabee, who was then the general secretary, brought forth this document. What do Quakers believe? And it had 9 nicely ordered points. I didn't find them particularly controversial, but the discussion that ensued, it was clear that the body, yearly meeting and session, did not
Mhm.
believe that was a legitimate question, and that no body could answer that question with any kind of authority. So that really has set me thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting phenomenon. I know Arthur, of course, and as a general secretary, part of his job is to represent Friends to outside organizations. And General Secretary of PYM goes to the World Council of Churches meetings and goes to any kind of ecumenical gathering that's happening in the Philadelphia area. And of course, everyone's going to ask him, like, well, who are the Quakers and what do they believe? He's a lawyer by training, so he's going to be very thoughtful. He's going to come up with these statements. I was looking at them again today. There is that of God in everyone was one, which is about as generic a Quaker statement as you can get. And each person is capable of direct and unmediated experience of God. Not too controversial, shouldn't be. But so do you think the yearly meeting people didn't agree or just think that this was not even a question for us to be able to answer?
Yeah. So first of all, I thought that for the purposes that Arthur wanted to be able to present Friends to the outside world, I thought it was a perfectly reasonable attempt at getting at the kind of core beliefs. But I think underneath everything was the Quaker belief that we can't try to crystallize our beliefs in any kind of creed, and this was just getting too close to doing that. There was no kind of decision. It was clear that we were not in unity to approve it. And so I took away from that it was not a question we were willing to address for historical and contemporary reasons.
Yeah. Now, it does have an afterlife. Art was interviewed for the Quaker Speak video series that Friends Publishing does. And Nine Core Quaker Beliefs is one of the more
Yeah.
popular videos month after month. People are searching online, what do Quakers believe? And here they have Arthur Larrabee's list of things that he thinks Quakers believe, but not an official list.
Yeah.
But it's a good list. And I think it does represent pretty well.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, in fact, we use that in our session for
Okay.
newcomers.
Yeah.
I think there was a pretty recent Quaker Speak video that was a kind of a collage of people answering that question, what do Quakers believe? Am I remembering that, or was it?
There is a, not that recent now. So I think it's about 20 minutes long. What do
Yeah,
Quakers believe? And we've used that in my meeting, shown
yeah,
it, and it opened up all sorts of interesting discussions. People I've known for years now, just saying things that, surprised me. That's another way of asking what do friends believe. Just get a whole bunch of friends together. I think there's at least a dozen friends, maybe more in that video. And if you see what each of them believe, you get perhaps the consolation of what friends all over might be said to believe.
yeah. And I think several people in that video emphasize that it's hard to come up with a common core set of beliefs beyond the
Yes.
nebulous that of God in everyone.
Yes. I always, well, frequently will freeze if someone asks me, what do Quakers believe? And I'm like, do I believe? Do most believe? It's a tough one. And then if you get beyond just the, US and Philadelphia area, if you're like African friends and Latin American friends, then it becomes even more challenging because there's such a diversity of belief that's going on. So, but you tried to attempt another way of getting around this question about belief. Why don't you share some of that thinking you've been doing about the nature of belief?
Yeah, and I think what set me off on this was many years ago reading Marcus Borg's The Heart of I think it's The Heart of Christianity. I can't remember. It was in the article where he talks about kind of the etymology of the word belief, and that pointed out that until kind of early modern times, the object, the grammatical object of a statement, I believe, would not be a proposition or theory, but it would be a person, as in, I believe in you. And he points out the etymology, believe is closely related to beloved. And so the idea of, instead of talking about what Quakers believe as a list of propositions, what do we love? What do we be love? Um, and that gets us to, I think, what always been essential to Quakers is the idea of experience. What is it we experience? I keep coming back to this. I didn't put this in the article, but what I consider kind of one of the foundational things in early Quakers, I think probably the first pamphlet any Quaker ever published was Saul's Errand to Damascus by Naylor and Fox. And it's a kind of mix of things, but one of the things is the account of the trial of James Naylor when he was on trial in I think 1653. So the very early days on trial
A
for
trial
blasphemy.
for blasphemy. Yeah.
And he was asked by the questioner, doesn't this emphasis on the inward light of Christ, doesn't that in effect deny the events of 1600, now 2000 years ago in Jerusalem, essentially denying the historical Christ and the things we know as the atonement? Naylor answered something like, if I cannot witness Christ nearer than Jerusalem, I shall have no benefit by him. But I own no other Christ than he who witnessed a good confession before Pontius Pilate, and this Christ I witness in me now. So I think in that short statement is kind of the essence. What happened 2,000 years ago is not sufficient. It has to be a present experience. And yet there's still this sense of a confidence of faith that what happened 2,000 years ago is connected to what I'm feeling now. It's the same Christ, and Christ is a kind of the universal Christ that Richard Rohr talks about. And then his statement that, and that Christ I witness in me now.
Yeah.
I think that's
Beautiful.
most of Quaker theology right there.
Right. The Christ is still here with us and guiding us and comforting us and doing all the same things that he did back in the biblical days.
Yeah. And one thing if I could add is that, so I know I'm comfortable with Christ language and the inward light of Christ. And I know there are friends who are not, and there are good reasons why they're not. I'm not denying that. In these newcomer sessions, a persistent question is, are Quakers Christian? And how do you understand that? And they're mostly coming from backgrounds and other kind of more conservative churches. And so that's a live question for them because in some sense, they all left those churches because um, the fundamentalism was grating on them. So I always pull off this thing from my shelf. This is the Reader's Guide to George Fox's Journal by Joseph McVence. And he makes a fascinating statement. The commonest cause of misunderstanding of Fox's teaching today is a failure to realize how wide and deep and functional is the meaning that, quote, Christ had for him. It is mistakenly assumed that Fox means what other Christians mean by Christ and his work. Not so. His gospel teaching was intended to challenge the church's teaching about Jesus Christ and how he saves men. So I think what he's getting at there is what Naylor was basically saying, that again, what Richard Rohr would call just him, but the universal Christ or the cosmic Christ, this idea that, as Lloyd C. Wilson once told me, Jesus is the Christ, but Christ is much bigger than Jesus. So those things have always been helpful to me.
Sure. So how do we then describe Quakerism, though, to people before they get to the meeting house? It sounds like once they get to the meeting house, they're in this class, you're doing great. How do we describe to them before when they're walking by on the street,
Yeah.
what do Quakers believe? I don't know if you have an answer for that. It's a eternal question we have.
Yeah, and these sessions were for people who had already, over the past several months, wandered into meeting and come back at least a
Mhm.
few times, so they already had that experience of worship. Yeah, yeah. Say that question again. That's a good one.
Well, and I'm just thinking my own experience when I started exploring peace activism, long family history. I can go into that forever, but I'm not just, I'm in the Philadelphia area. I'm going to like peace events, little rallies or workshops or stuff. And there's Quakers all around. And so for me, it's like my entry was like, there's something else going on with them. They have something that I want to find, that they've aligned their lives to this. They've spent years of discernment. They have these processes. Like for me, that was the draw, but I had already gotten to know them through these events I was going to. So how do we talk about what Quakers believe when they're still just walking outside the doors? They haven't come in, they don't know anything. How do we reach out to them is a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't have a good answer to that. I hope that, and what seems to be happening in our troubled times is that people are discovering us. And I think the live question for me is, okay, so these people are wandering into meeting, they're sitting through an hour of mostly silence. They may hear some ministry, it may be good or it may be off the wall. And I've always said that it's possible to sit through silent meetings for a long time and miss a lot about what Quakers are about. So these sessions are kind of trying to deepen people's kind of appreciation for the breadth of the tradition. What you said, there's a lot of resonance with my experience that I came to Quakers when I was 18. Um, and not in Philadelphia. I didn't know any Quakers. I grew up in kind of a mainline Protestant church. And when I turned 18, there was still a draft. And
Oh, mhm.
on kind of my reading of the New Testament, I filed as a conscientious objector. And yeah, there wasn't a huge amount of support for that in my mainline church. So I started to read a lot. I had Quakers in my family tree. So I was fascinated to read about the peace testimony and how the Quakers arising in mid 17th century England at the same time as my Baptist and Congregational church, the churches had combined, and yet came out at such a different place on questions of war and peace. So when I went off to college a couple months later, I just fell into going to a Quaker meeting. There was a small group of students who carpooled 20 miles. I just immediately felt at home. And in that little meeting, which was in Bennington, Vermont, there were 4 men who had been conscientious objectors in World War II. It was just an
So
enormously
the memories were there and yeah, the
yeah,
experience. Yeah,
yeah.
that's great.
So for the first time in my CO journey, I felt a place where I could feel at home.
Where they could accept you, yeah. No, when I finally did walk into the meeting house and people could understand, what I was searching for, something more than just a conventional life, and, people were just so supportive in a way that was very refreshing. You do have another good quote in this, that I wanted to just ask you about, the Paul Lacey quote,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and I can, describe it here. "A Quaker is not someone who subscribes to certain doctrines about God or Christ, nor someone who specifically strives to obey the teachings of Jesus, nor even someone who follows a certain inherent testimonies. Rather, to be a Quaker is to have met the inward Christ by whatever name that reality is known." So Paul Lacey, a sort of contemporary educator, saying that, to be Quaker is to have met the inward Christ by whatever name that reality is known. That's a nice kind of statement. I don't know if it would work for, outreach exactly for people who are worried about the language, the Christian language there.
Yeah. And the part by whatever name that is known is
Yeah.
my addition to that, to paraphrase.
Okay.
I have used that in talking with especially the questions about our Quakers Christian and stuff. And it does seem to resonate with people along the spectrum, both people who are very conventional in their Christian belief can say, "Oh yeah, that resonates." And people who have consider themselves post-Christian or something other than Christian, it still resonates as I think a universal experience, especially if we say, you may know this by another name, but this is what it gets back to the experience.
right? That it's all about our relationship with this inward spirit, both individually to ourselves, but also I think in this communal way
Mhm,
when we come to the meeting and are known by
mhm,
not just the inward Christ, but all the other people in the meeting.
mhm.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Thomas. It's been great to talk with you and to hear what do Quakers believe from your perspective. The whole issue has all sorts of different perspectives,
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
invite everyone to read through all the articles, and
yeah,
then
and
there's a bunch of online articles too.
excited to see some of the Spanish language things getting into print and stuff. That's a big step
Yes, and
for
we
me.
have story of what do Quakers believe from a friend from El Salvador, and he wrote it in Spanish, his
Mhm,
first language, and
mhm.
we've translated it, and we have a whole lot more. French Journal is getting international, so we're committed to publishing more Spanish and Swahili articles, translated, of course, but for our audience, and to really share and maybe make this question of what do we believe more complicated because we have an even wider geography and theology. But it's very exciting to
It is exciting.
see what we have in common. Yeah.
Keep up the good work. That's good.
Sure. Thanks. Well,
Okay,
and again, thanks for joining, and I hope to hear some more articles from you soon.
okay. Take care.
Take care.